made by both Dr. Inda Rupra on my left and Professor Anthony Clayton, who is next to Amina. Dr. Rupra will be looking at the ways in which multilateral organizations can strengthen good governance, and Professor Clayton will be talking about a new model of development planning called Foresighting for Development, which identifies possible future scenarios and makes those scenarios manageable through effective planning. Properly applied, this is an incredibly helpful tool, and I assume is based a bit on the Singapore model. Yeah. Let me introduce the two discussants to the far left. Dr. Wendy Grenard, lecturer in political science and the Deputy Dean at the Faculty of Social Sciences, UWI Cave Hill campus. She will share her perspective on good governance and sustainable development through the lens of multidimensional security. And Professor Lino Bruglio is the director of the Islands and Small States Institute at the University of Malta. His main area of interest is islands and small state studies, in particular economic aspects. He will identify 2 or 3 actions which can advance our agenda in this area. And finally, on the very far left, Dr. Justin Ram is Director of Economics at the Caribbean Development Bank, and he will share his recommendations on governance and the Caribbean economic growth strategies. Before I ask Amina to speak, a request to all of you, which I have already made to the panel. Yes, the last 2 days have been really interesting with a lot of analysis and a great deal of content. Today, we hope to move us from the I have a dream to the more practical issues of how would I get my civil rights legislation through. So in the interventions from the floor, I really ask no statements. Please respect the effort that the panelists are making, many of whom have agreed to bin their prepared comments, and as succinctly as possible, move to what you think needs to be done with yourself at the center. When we say people are at the center of sustainable development, part of that means what are the positive actions that I, as the human being, plan to do, not just what I hope government and the private sector does. With those remarks, Amina, please.
How long do I have? Okay, thank you very much. And hello again, everyone. This is a really important part of I think, the whole 3 days that we've got as we've discussed and shaped the new Sustainable Development Agenda. One of the most difficult parts of it to agree of the 17 goals that we have now was really the goal on governance, on peace, on institutions, on the rule of law. And it was quite a surprise. I think it really tested the whole issue of ownership, and we talk about this locally in most circumstances, but internationally, in 2012, the UN had agreed a resolution on the rule of law. And when we came to negotiate with 193 countries and all the stakeholders that we brought to the table, one of the most difficult things was to discuss Goal 16 on institutions, rule of law. And the question was, so the resolution we have, where is the link between that ownership and commitment to it, to the reality now of let's live up to what you put on paper? So again, going from the rhetoric and the paper to the practice is going to be really different in the different contexts that we have to deal with governance and accountability as we roll out the next plan. And I think that it is around 3 issues I'd like to quickly pick up. One, in terms of ownership. The second will be about implementing the actions that we need to take. And the third, I think it's worth, at this point, really speaking a little to the data and statistics issue. In terms of owning it, again, the assumption is that the representatives that we have in New York, of course, are bringing priorities of their countries, and this agenda would inform it. And the accountability mechanism, which is yet to be discussed, the review mechanism, the indicators that we would use to hold ourselves to account on the 17 goals, all a work in progress, would all be a reflection of what countries here own and feed into. And I think that this is the first litmus test, the challenge of how are we going to make sure that come January 1, when we begin a transition, that the whole issue of governance and accountability on delivering this agenda, that the basic premise for it, the basic indicators that we put through and we agree are ones that really do resonate in our countries, and bearing in mind that we're not starting from scratch. There are some, I believe that countries across the world, as we've discussed with them, have one form of accountability or another, not up to where we would like it to be, and that for many of us is a work in progress. But could this be the framework, and do we own this framework? And to have a really decent discussion about it now. I think now is really the time that we need all constituencies in the room to talk about it. The second will be very quickly, implementation will become a reality. We hope that we can hit the ground running, that we will not spend 5 years, as we did with the MDGs, trying to understand the prescription. And for this, what is it that we have already in place? The stakeholders that we want to introduce to this new agenda are huge. With the existing stakeholders that we have, government, donors, international partners, we didn't do such a good job in holding ourselves to account on the MDG agenda. So we want to do better. We want to learn the lessons. But we've got many more new partners in the room who look at success, who look at results differently. And to challenge in government that we have the basis for that, the enabling environment for it, but also to look at one part of government that is incredibly important, our parliamentarians. Their representation of people, the three really important things we think they bring to the table, which is in providing the enabling environment for the executive arm of government to work, they are going to have to put in place laws, they are going to have to put in place appropriations that reflect the plans and the aspirations of people, and third, they will, of course, have to live up to the oversight responsibility that they have, and that requires an alignment of what measures they use towards the human development agenda that's sustainable, and that of what government uses as we have over the past. The other stakeholder is business, and I think as we've spoken to SIDS countries, it's become really apparent that business itself has got many, many issues that we need and challenges that we need to address in holding themselves accountable. We're often saying certainly our speak that we put responsible before the business. And how do we go beyond corporate social responsibility in business? Coming into this agenda, we want them to change their core business models that result in, yes, you can have profit, not off the backs of people and planet, but with people and planet in the center, and it can be done. Now for that, business has KPIs, key performance indicators, and they don't often align with that whole notion of you've got to do this with people and planet at the center. So how can we also ensure, as we have been doing in conversations with business across the world, that they also align with the indicators that we have in country, and that there's some coherence to that in terms of the results that we want to achieve. So a lot of work in trying to make sure that we are going to address governance in a way that people matter first. I think often we're going to the structures, we're going to the academics of it. It would be, what's due, what's not due, and I think all that's really important, but where is it coming from? We have to really work from expectations and rights of people. There are many, many tools that we can use to effect this, and I know that a lot of it should come from a really good, finally, baseline of data. I think we cannot underestimate how important it is to invest in institutions that are responsible for data and statistics across all sorts of constituencies, all sorts of sectors and areas. This is, for us, the litmus test of whether we do want to take everyone forward. We said leave no one behind. But it's also really important for strategic investments. If we really need to do something on ensuring that everyone has water, for instance, portable water, safe drinking water, sanitation. For years, we have siloed the approach of investing in people and water and sanitation, and we often end up spending so much more that could have been done better, more efficiently. And I think that here, data really does help us. It is an unattractive spend. I said that this morning. It is incredibly important that we look at data literacy. It's amazing how that is a huge vacuum in public service. It's a huge vacuum even in the education system in trying to appreciate that. And then today we are much luckier that we have so much more technology that we can bring together that does so much more for us. So I think underscoring governance and accountability in the SDGs, take those, and I think it's a huge menu, but it's one that's very specific, remembering that countries are not going to be reinventing the wheel. They shouldn't reinvent the wheel. They are doing things already, but what we need to do is to perhaps strengthen it, learn from the lessons of where the gaps are, and move forward.
Amina, thank you very much. If I can just follow on that a bit. When you started working on the MDG agenda for Nigeria, what kind of baseline data did you have? And one of the points that came up, particularly yesterday, was the dearth of data and statistics in the region. Now, I mean, we're talking a huge quantitative gap between the citizens of this region and Nigeria, but any perspective that you have on, that issue before I move on?
It was an incredibly difficult time. First of all, at that time, data was politicized, so it was not open and transparent. And there were a lot of suspicions that what we wanted to use the data for was really to have a witch hunt. And so changing the mindset and really working public servants together with civil society, together with other functionaries in government to see what it was that we wanted to do. And in the case of the MDGs, this came off, for us, the investments, we made $1 billion a year available as additional expenditure to try to reach the MDGs in our country. And it came from debt relief, and the debt relief was a pretty hard deal to get. Now, the international community didn't believe with the governance structures that we had, we would use this well. Nigerians themselves doubted that we would do this well. And so we had to figure out a way to build trust back between government and the people in delivering on that. And one of the first things we set up was to say that, well, instead of us measuring and holding ourselves to account with a set of measures that we essentially designed, we brought civil society in to do it, and we actually outsourced holding us to account. That was easier said than done. It took 2 years to make sure that we had given the enabling environment for civil society and other players to design the tools for it. It's easy for international partners that helped government to do this, but those tools were not seen as independent in measuring. First difficulty was baseline. We did not have baseline data, and that's taken time, and it's still a work in progress, and huge investments are required of it. But if you can show the implications and how you can improve things with that, and how we brought much closer together our civil society constituencies to hold us to account. What also happened was that we pushed the parameters in the discussion with our parliaments, who are, inverted commas, representatives of the people, and this is different everywhere. Democracies are a work in progress, and there's some doing really well and some not doing so well. And for a long time, civil society activists have been representatives of the people, and so moving to say, these are the elected representatives, so let's actually ask them to be held to account for that, but at the same time, recognize civil society perhaps could have a role in knowing best what those issues were, and bring them to Parliament, and then Parliament themselves being responsible for helping to get government to make the right investments in them. All this required baselines that we didn't have, but we did use, especially in the health sector, began to use what we had in terms of surveys that have been supported by international partners, and over time, the cell phone became one of the biggest products that we had that enabled us to get real-time feedback on that.
Thank you very much, Amina, and that is a great launching point for Inder's comments on how multilaterals can support ongoing